This is a very special webinar that we're putting on as Communal. I won't sell you Communal right now. You're welcome to go to our website or send me a message on LinkedIn. I wanted to give you a very brief introduction to this webinar, how this came about, tell you a brief story. We launched Communal at the beginning of this year, and we wanted to host an in-person event. Something isn't real until you have dinner and drinks, and made it real. So we thought we'll do something in person, and we need a speaker for that event. So I asked around in a couple of Slack groups, and very quickly introduced to Nicola as someone who's great at speaking about customer experience and therefore omnichannel and everything that comes out of it. And I asked Nicola if she'd come speak at our event, and she said no. She said, because we're working in the pharma industry, she's got colleagues who work more with healthcare and more of that side of things. And I said to her, actually, we didn't want someone to come and talk to us about omnichannel in healthcare, because I've been to a lot of those webinars. You've all been to those webinars. They're all kind of the same. We wanted something unique and to talk about actually what is just really good customer experience. And that's exactly what Nicola is good at. So she lamented and came along to our in-person event and spoke about that. And it was really impactful to me and to the rest of the audience about how we think about customer experience from a Medcom's pharma communication point of view. It was such a success, in fact, that we immediately said to Nicola, will you please come and do this as a webinar as well? We had a lot of people who were not in the UK who were interested in coming, or people who just couldn't attend. And she kindly agreed. So that's how we are here today. We've also got a couple of panelists who are going to help have a little discussion afterwards about how we take those learnings about what is just really good customer experience that Nicola will present on and apply those to our industry. So make sure you stick to that. That's about it. Please enjoy this. There will be a Q&A box in Zoom. Please put your questions in as you go through, as you think of them, and we'll get to those at the end. And yes, I'd just like to introduce Nicola then, Principal Innovation Partner at BT. Nicola describes herself as half social scientist, half technologist, and all academic. Has delivered numerous innovations at BT, including applying AI, which I'm sure you'll mention, innovations in employee and customer experience, written book, presented TED Talk, done awards. It's very good on the ukulele. I suggest you look that up on YouTube. So I will hand over to you, Nicola. Please go ahead.
Thank you, James. My ukulele is within reach, so I won't I won't treat you to a few songs. You'll be very relieved to know. So hello, my name's Nicola. I did used to be BT's futurologist, well, firstly, that's quite a silly job title. My job title has got a lot more boring recently. I'm now Principal Innovation Partner, but it saves me having quite so many crystal ball jokes, to be perfectly honest, because everyone, if you introduce yourself as a futurologist, they always go, well, tell me about the future, what's the football results, and to be honest, someone actually did give me a crystal ball. I saw no future in it though, so that's rather sad, but I probably have won the lottery a few times if I did actually have access to the future. I'm trying screen sharing and it's not letting me, so I may need to get a human clicker enabled to show my slides, if that's all right. So if you could put my slides up, that would be greatly appreciated. I'm just going to witter on a little bit about my background whilst that's happening. Yeah, I'm part of BT's innovation team. I am based at the lovely Adastral Park, which is just outside Ipswich. I'm actually not there today. I'm in my front room, oddly enough, as I have been quite a lot over the past 3 years doing things like this. But I am part of the innovation team. I'm a weird part of the innovation team, I guess, in BT. So my role is to take a lot of the innovation that we do at Adastral Park, but also beyond. We work with a lot of university partners for a start, and startups and all sorts of other people. That's why I don't need a crystal ball, to be honest. I have very clever people I can talk to. I work with them to try and sort of, I guess, conduit out that research to our major business clients. So my role and the team's role that I'm in is to innovate with and for largely our large corporate partners, some public sector as well. I'm also a slightly weird part of the team because I am half a technologist, as you would expect from a company like BT. I'm never terribly sure whether it's the half you can't see or the slightly, well, I look as if I'm selling ice cream today, but the colourful top half of me, I don't know which half it is, but the other half of me, whichever half of that is a psychologist. So I always claim I look at the most disruptive part of innovation, which is, of course, not the technology, it's us, because unless we use it and embrace it, it's pretty useless. So My role really is to get under the skin of customers. And I use the word customers, I mean, it's us, basically, everybody, trying to understand, what do we want from organizations in terms of customer experience? What's the omni-channel experience like? And indeed, looking at innovation and what customers want from innovation too. And because I don't have a crystal ball, we do this using research. And if we could nudge on one slide, that would be great. So this is some research. It's a fairly unique piece of research that we've been doing since 2010. It's panel research, and it's global. We usually take 500 customers per country. We try and make it as representative of the population as a whole as we possibly can. As you can see, in 2010, we were quite modest. We only did 2 countries. And over the years, we've got more and more ambitious. And actually, 2019 was kind of our I guess it was supposed to be our flagship year. It was a significant anniversary of the research. And of course, if you remember back that far, it seems ages ago now, that was kind of the last normal year we had in terms of, well, it was the last non-pandemic year. So actually we normally do it every 2 years. We did an abnormal version during abnormal times in 2020 to try and figure out, was the pandemic having any significant impact on behavior? More on that in a minute. But we've gone back to the 2-year cycle. And actually this year, we are about to publish, and I've been saying this for about a month now. I have actually seen the paper now, so I'm convinced it's real. I'm hoping it will be out by the end of the week. But this year's, we've done 8 countries around the world. What I'm going to present today is basically the global average. I can take it down into each individual country. I will show a couple of slides because obviously I'm based in the UK. Many of you may well be as well. I'll pull out some specific UK data. I'm actually still going through some of this data, so it is very new. So you're kind of guinea pigs on this one. So let's have a look and see what we found. If we could nudge on one slide. I think the first thing to say is, because this is longitudinal research, the first thing is that it's actually remarkably stable in terms of what customers want from customer experience. And that wasn't really affected by the pandemic even. So I would firstly comment that customers want very good customer experiences. In fact, they expect really excellent ones. And that number has not varied at all, really, in the past maybe 5-6 iterations of the research. So customers expect it by default. They're very hard to wow now because they just kind of expect high standards. And that standard is often benchmarked from organizations outside your sector, whether it's Amazon or Apple or whoever your favorite brand is in terms of excellent service. We also know, and obviously I'm a psychologist, so I would say that the first other consistent piece of psychological data is that we're all quite lazy, whether we're in our personal lives or our business lives. We want things to be easy because frankly, nothing is. I mean, particularly during the pandemic, we certainly got people saying, oh God, just make things easy for me because I'm battling a whole load of other things. And we're still in troubled times. There's still a lot of pressures coming at us from all sorts of angles. So easy is a real driving dimension that we find from what customers want. From an omni-channel behavior perspective, it also means that I'm going to go for a channel that I think is going to be easy. And often those channels are digital because we have that sort of 24/7 expectation around digital channels. We expect them to be easy. We expect them to get us to our goal fast. More on that in a minute, because that might not be the case. And in fact, we're still seeing some fairly negative data around digital experiences generally. So easy is a real thing that we certainly have done quite a lot of work around. That's a principal driver. How do we just take out that friction from a customer perspective? So the first thing is not a huge amount of change over the past few years. Those expectations are high and customers really want things to be easy and convenient. So let's nudge on one and see what else is going on here. I mean, to be honest, one of the intriguing things about this data is something new comes out every year that we do it. This is a trend that I think probably has been emerging over the past couple of years as a result of everyone pushing everything into the digital space. And this means that a lot of us have become proxy customers. What I mean by that is, well, I'm one of those. Actually, my mother is 85. She has an iPad. But she's really not that confident in using anything much more than email. and WhatsApp and FaceTime. Actually, I've got her into FaceTime as well, but she's not confident to do anything really beyond that digitally. So what happens? Well, I become her on a number of things, whether it's medical advice, whether it's dealing with utilities companies, whether it's paying council bills. I am the person that does that digitally on her behalf. Now, I have no legal power of attorney to do that, but I am becoming her proxy in terms of that digital customer. That's not just for older customers, by the way. I think we're seeing the same trend amongst carers, and actually to a certain extent, some younger customers as well are getting their parents to be proxies for them online as well. So this is quite an interesting one around, as I said, that legality and regulation piece is quite interesting in many industries that are very heavily regulated. Can we start to understand how that customer behind the customer is working, and how do we help them become the proxy customer that they actually are? So that's one that kind of emerged that I think is very interesting, certainly from a healthcare perspective. If we could nudge on one, this is a graph, and I apologize for this graph, but I find I'm a bit geeky. I find graphs unreasonably exciting. I'm that kind of person, but this is a particularly exciting one because the UK has been one of the countries that we've looked at consistently across the years. And therefore, what we've been able to do is to compare over the years UK behaviours. Now, from an omni-channel perspective, this is basically the past, how many, 7 iterations of the data we're at now, looking at, you know, when you want to contact an organization, what channel do you use? What channel do you turn to? And this gives us a lot of information basically around channel trends and whether one channel is replacing another. The first thing to say is one channel is not replacing another. We're not seeing a rip and replace here. We did wonder whether email would start to get superseded by other channels like WhatsApp or chat. We haven't quite found that. In fact, BT did try and turn email off at one point because it's a great information channel. It's not a particularly great conversation channel because it is by its nature somewhat asynchronous. The result was we turned email back on because customers wanted to email us, and they were going to quite long degrees to try and find something that would send us an email. So we turned it back on. We did see some shift to channels like web chat, but if we look at the web chat graph, that in itself is pretty interesting because we can see the hype curve. So we can see 2017 was the peak hype for things like web chat. You know, that's when a little box appears at the bottom of the web page saying, would you like to talk to us? Sometimes annoyingly, to be honest. What we then found was a trough of disillusionment hit because people did push that button and they did do a chat. And of course, I work with contact centers a lot. Usually the business case on web chat is concurrency. So usually you've got one person on multiple chat sessions, and we know that makes for a very bad conversation. Sometimes those conversations drop out mid-conversation and you have to start again. So it was creating a bad digital experience, and that was having an impact on other channels. In fact, the one channel that reliably picks up when other channels fail is the phone. Now, we're always surprised about the phone because, to be honest, it was on a downward shift and now it's going back up again. And as I said, we're tending to find that that's a channel that's trusted by most people. It's very accessible and it has come to become a bit of a niche. And I'll explain a little bit more about the phone's primary function in a minute. But we can start to see, I mean, for example, social media, we can see its ebbs and flows. We can see the hype cycles there. I keep saying with social media, particularly on very, very, I guess, personal things, we don't necessarily want to have our dirty washing entirely in public. So it's a channel shift channel. People pick people up from social media and have to shift them to a more one-on-one channel. And actually, we also see omni-channel behaviors from customers because, again, customers are often very impatient. If one channel doesn't reply, we'll see customers sitting on multiple channels at the same time. So they might email, they might tweet, they might be sitting on a chat session, they might be sitting on the phone. And the worst case scenario is a couple of those channels, maybe 3 of those channels answer, you get triple handling of that question and maybe inconsistent answers between channels because sometimes they're run out of different departments. So this is an interesting portrait of kind of how channel choices have changed over the years. My interest is less in the channel, to be perfectly honest, but why? If we could nudge on one. A lot of the psychology behind this is interesting, and we've asked customers over the years why they choose the channels as well as what channels they do use. And the picture started to emerge that customers don't actually care an awful lot about channels. We obsess about them. but they don't. Actually, ultimately, they have a goal. And there's usually an intention state behind that goal. And it's actually that intention state that drives channel choice. And that intention state is either positive, negative, or neutral. Now, positively motivated customers, we call these visionaries. Maybe they are proactively managing their health. Maybe they're getting married. Maybe they're going on holiday. What we find with those kind of customers is they are willing to spend time, energy, and efforts. They Google stuff. We call them shopper swaps in the retail environment. They do their homework. They try and figure out what's right for them. Now, because it usually matters, they can be a bit paranoid. So sometimes they need a tiny bit of advice, a bit of reassurance that this is absolutely the right thing to do, or this will arrive in time. Now, they're largely quite easy to deal with because as long as you don't confuse them, they're very positively motivated. The trouble is they can tip into a negatively motivated customer if they get angry or frustrated, or they can start in that state. We call these customers in crisis. They are negatively motivated and all sorts of things start to change here. I mean, weird chemicals start to flood into the brain when we're angry or frustrated or scared even. This destroys logic. So we don't think logically, we get tunnel vision. Our short-term memory capacity actually halves. So if you're trying to design something, it's got to be incredibly simple. Typically, these customers are the ones that reach the phone, though, because they want usually access to somebody where they can either hand the problem over or they can get human advice. So if we're going to put automation in front of customers in crisis, we've got to make that automation incredibly simple. We know, for example, that doctors giving someone a cancer diagnosis, once someone's heard the cancer word, they don't hear anything after that. So actually, that's where supplementary information sent afterwards actually really does have an impact with those customers in crisis. But largely, they do want human contact and are quite difficult to deal with. And actually, your human advisors are the ones that are hit highly with those customers in crisis. And we're seeing that around agent populations having much more complex things hitting them and much more emotive things hitting them. But we're not always positive or negative. That would be exhausting. There is a midpoint we call utilitarian, and that's usually very typical transactional routine stuff. I always say buying carrots, paying bills, putting repeat orders in. We don't need wow. What really drives us there is that easy piece. And that's, actually, if you can put digital technologies in, if you can put automation in there, customers on that utilitarian path will welcome that. The trouble is, of course, again, if they hit a problem, they're going to tip into a customer in crisis. What we've actually done here is to start to construct omni-channel journeys in a very different way. So rather than using those journeys in a typical age demographic persona type style, what we started to do is to say, well, can we gather enough information about this customer to figure out where they might be in terms of that journey? And then down below that falls those channel choices. So for visionaries, give them lots of channels, but give them access to just a bit of reassurance. That could be a bot, that could be a human. For a customer in crisis, put a very large phone number up and make any automation really simple. And of course, if they're in utilitarian mode, put lots of digital tools in, but make those tools incredibly easy to use. So that's a very different way of looking at customer experience for a start. We could nudge on one. I've mentioned chat a few times because I still think that's a channel where there's a lot of growth, because we're using particularly things like WhatsApp in our personal lives an awful lot. There are a lot of advantages that we've documented from customers saying, you've got a record of the conversation and you can do it in your own time. But of course, as soon as we hit chat, we end up in an innovation conversation. If we could nudge on one, please. The conversation I generally get pulled in for is about chatbots, which is an incredibly trendy topic to talk about with ChatGPT at the moment. The problem is, I think, well, firstly, we've probably all encountered chatbots now. I think about 70% of websites now have some kind of triage function powered by a bot. The problem is, although bots offer a lot of potential, they're not necessarily fulfilling it from a customer experience perspective. In fact, they can cause more damage than good if they are deployed at the wrong part of the customer journey, particularly with those customers in crisis, it has to be said. What we are finding slightly worrying from the data is that 70% of those customers are saying that bad bots actually can damage brands. And that's where I keep saying we can get very carried away by things like ChatGPT, and it's an incredible technology. And I mean, my breath has been taken away by some of the things that it can do. It's great at conversation. However, it needs data. And the problem with a lot of enterprise systems at the moment is that they are on multiple systems. That data can be inconsistent, it can be unreliable, it can be unstable. And those bots work from that data. The other thing I would comment on is if you have a bot that's separated out from the contact center, that can be a very frustrated experience as well. It's a bit like those IVRs of the past, you know, when you had to press 1s and 2s and then got either stuck in an infinite loop or cut off. So that was a bad experience as well. So similarly, what we've been looking at is how can we, if we start with a bot and that bot then fails, it doesn't cut you off. It actually skills-based routes you to a human that can then hopefully see what that conversation was and pick up at the point where the bot failed. So we need to think carefully around how we deploy those bots, because we can damage customer experience very easily. If we could nudge on one, please. I mean, AI is a bit of a hot topic generally. I always say I get my innovation credentials revoked if I didn't talk about AI, but I think there's lots of areas that we can start to think about AI, not least, I mean, those frontline jobs, actually having a little AI helper to navigate through multiple information sources, complex information, so that they can concentrate on the conversation with the customer, I think is a good one. So having a little AI helper, to be honest, with a lot of bots at the moment, we're often testing them with agents, and actually getting them to help agents. And if they work with agents, we can then start to put them into the customer space because the agents have effectively tested them. But we've got all sorts of other things. I mean, identification is often a very big problem. We're in a bit of an arms race on the ID side at the moment because we've been using biometrics a lot, particularly voice biometrics, i.e. your voice is your password. But we've now got to that point where AI can copy your voice with only about 20 to 30 seconds worth of a sample. And then that can pass biometrics now. So we're in a bit of a race in terms of how do we identify people without them having to remember multiple passwords, because frankly we don't. So are there other ways that we can do in terms of actually identifying and verifying people are who they are? AI might have a part there. But the other innovation, if we could nudge on one, of course, is the metaverse. Oh, sorry, I'm still on AI. I'm gonna do the metaverse in a second. Actually, one of the big ones around AI also is around firstly, personalization. So can I learn a lot about the customer and then personalize those choices for them, hold their hands, know who they are, and help them? So, I mean, Amazon have been doing that for years. So we're quite comfortable with that. So personalization is the first step. If we can get a personalized service, can we then start to also become a lot more proactive? So this is all about knowing what message is likely to resonate with the customer. So can I tell the customer things that they need to know before they call in and tell me? So it's got to be the right message, it's got to be the right channel, and it's got to be at the right time. If it's none of those three, that becomes annoying. I always use the analogy, it's like someone tapping me on the shoulder repeatedly as I'm walking down the street. Now that would rapidly become annoying, and in the human world I'd probably turn around and punch that person. In the digital world, I have GDPR. That's my punch. I'm going, no, you're not having my data anymore because you're not being useful to me. And of course, again, AI doesn't work by magic, it works by data. So this is quite an interesting one. I call it a me economy. How much am I willing to share, and what am I getting back in terms of that proactivity? And again, there's a lot of healthcare applications around that, particularly around caring, virtual care. The third step is predictive. Of course, this is where algorithms really can kick in. Can I start to tell people things that they need to know before they even know? Now, there is a fine line in this space between a butler and a stalker. What we want to be is the butler, anticipating people's needs in a positive way rather than being very stalkery, because if we cross that stalky line, again, GDPR will be our weapon and we'll go, not having my data anymore, you're just getting creepy. I think this is a really interesting space because, of course, we can get a lot more data now, whether it's through Internet Things, smart buildings, smart everything. This is the big dilemma that we have. How do we sell that to the customer in terms of making that a good customer experience and doing things that they want rather than being annoying? Now to the metaverse. Yeah. This is an interesting one because we did ask a question about AI a couple of years ago, and customers got very excited about all the hype around AI. And then, of course, we've just seen what happens when they encounter it with reality. This is similar, I think, probably to the metaverse. We asked questions around would they be positive around doing things over the metaverse, and the answer was, yeah, looks really intriguing, looks very exciting. And I can think of all sorts of things I could do over it. The reality, of course, I think I think in the technology sector, it has already hit the trough of disillusionment because even Meta have laid off quite a lot of their metaverse team. I think the big question that we're asking is not necessarily do we want a full-scale metaverse, but how can we use some of the tools of the metaverse to create slightly different customer experiences? If we could nudge on one, we're not really doing true metaverse, but what we are starting to do is to use things like not necessarily VR. I have to say I have some issues with VR. I call it vomity reality. You put a headset on me, usually you need a bucket quite close. Also, I have rapidly realized when we did trial it, it's very difficult to drink a cup of coffee when you've got a VR headset on, and I run on coffee. So that's a no-goer for me for a start. I do think it's got some really quite interesting case studies around training and simulation, but I'm going to park VR. I'm going to go more AR and mixed reality at the moment. Now, AR, we're doing some very interesting stuff, particularly in healthcare. One of the trials that we're running at the moment is with a paramedic actually using an augmented reality headset to broadcast high definition, real-time video images back to a remote clinician. That clinician also has a joystick, and that joystick is connected to a haptic glove that the paramedic is wearing. So what basically we can do is to start to get the paramedic to do procedures that they would not be able to do unsupervised. So obviously the theory is we can treat patients without admitting them to hospital. In our world, certainly things like broadband diagnostics, we are enabling our agents with permission of the customer to take control of the light and the camera on their smartphone, so that if we're doing broadband diagnostics, we can say, can you show us what you've got plugged in? And we can use AI pattern recognition, because it's all standard wires and sockets, to figure out whether everything is plugged in. From our perspective, that allows us to do a lot more troubleshooting without sending an engineer out to go, yeah, you've got the wrong thing plugged in. So we can often solve the problem far quicker for customers, and also save the expense of sending an engineer out in the first place. And actually things like our net promoter score, our net easy scores, go way up when we deploy that kind of technology. And then, I mean, I'm not sure how we're going to use this in the customer experience space, but could it be at some point that we go a little bit Star Wars? And I'm a massive Star Wars fan. So at some point, I might be projecting, rather than as a 2D video image on a Zoom webinar, I might be sitting in your office or on your kitchen table as a hologram advising you. So again, this is something called volumetric video. This is something that we're working on at the moment. It's not the same as avatar. So if you've been to the ABBA show, they had to wear lots of lycra and dots, and it was very expensive to capture them. Very impressive though. This is a slightly lower tech solution using multiple cameras, but again, what we can start to do is to capture a real-time image of you, your expressions, what you're wearing, and squirt that either into a hologram. At the moment, that's quite expensive, but also maybe into a metaverse type space. Again, who knows whether we're actually going to find some applications in customer experience for this. But I know, not a new argument, about 15 years ago, we did create a bank branch in Second Life. To be honest, wasn't that popular, but we'll see. We'll see. That's the beauty of innovation. Sometimes it fails. Sometimes it takes a little while. But anyway, it's always exciting to talk about. If we shift on one, that's pretty much the end, to be honest. Now, as I said, the research I'm hoping will be published by either the end of this week or the beginning of next week. Watch my socials. They will be out. That I'll be sort of publicizing when it does come out. We've also got quite a lot around the agent experience that we've done some research, particularly around hybrid working and how we support our frontline when they aren't necessarily getting the communities of support that they would normally get in a physical space. So if you're interested in that, completely different talk, but again, just nudge me on my socials, and I'm very happy to share. So I am going to shut up now, and hopefully we can have, hopefully that's a bit of food for thought that we can use for a bit of a discussion. Thank you.
Nicola, thank you so much. We are not going to let you shut up yet, I'm afraid. I've got lots of questions for you. So yeah, but thank you again, and some really great insights there that that would love to kind of pull out, but I'm not going to hog the limelight. Emily, I'm going to come to you. I know you had some questions. You've seen Nicola speak before. And I guess, you know, as we said, Nicola's work is interesting in and of itself, but we can start translating that into what it means for us in the healthcare space and how we're engaging with healthcare professionals particularly. So Emily, have you got some questions for Nicola?
I sure do. Thank you, Nicola. That was really thought-provoking. And second time round, I have even more questions. But I really took away, firstly, kind of, you know, your title, being human in a digital world, is something I've kind of fallen in a trap with before, that you kind of get so stuck into what you're doing, you forget that you are communicating to a person. So that's something that I've taken away. But I was particularly interested in the slide that you showed around the context, around the different customer. And that's also something I've never really kind of thought about before, about kind of, so you would look at kind of behavioral segmentation, or you look at customer type, but really thinking about the kind of state of mind people are in. I was wondering, have you seen the kind of split between where people sit if they're a visionary or customer in crisis? Has that kind of stayed the same over time? Are you seeing more people in crisis?
I mean, we don't look necessarily at the percentages of people that are in that segment. We just ask questions around, if you are in that state, how would you react? There's other research, certainly in the UK, the Institute of Customer Service published some recent research showing that increasingly, particularly public-facing people, contact centre agents, are getting much more abuse at the moment. Obviously, we've got a confluence of, you know, post-COVID, we were seeing that, well, during COVID, we were seeing that because people were increasingly in that crisis mode. And then obviously we've got an economic crisis as well at the moment, and indeed increased demand on things like public services. So we are certainly seeing a lot more customers probably nudging towards crisis mode. We are also seeing simultaneously demand on things like phone services going up. Actually, simultaneously, we're seeing satisfaction with those services going down, because again, managing demand is a problem. So one of the things that we did find in the research was that lovely message that we all tend to get, and, you know, your call is important to us. A lot of us, I think it's 8 out of 10 of us, have encountered that recently, and only less than 50% actually believe that that's true. So again, that's, how do you handle those channels better? And obviously there's a temptation to try and sort of do a lot of call deflection at that point, and often point out that you could do this online, to which, if you're in crisis mode, you're probably yelling, I tried that, it didn't work, just get me to a human. So there's a certain level of frustration there that maybe we might have even started fairly positive, but that experience might drive us into that crisis mode. So yeah, I mean, we're certainly probably seeing a lot more people in crisis. The other thing I would comment is, when we look at differences between age and demographic, they also become quite consistent, particularly in crisis mode. So I keep saying that a 16-year-old behaves very similarly to a 60-year-old when they're in crisis, because our brains haven't suddenly evolved away from standard human behavior in the past, well, probably a few thousand years actually, but you know, 16-year-olds are wired in a very similar way to a 60-year-old. And actually 16-year-olds, although they will probably start digitally, are very impatient and will, if they can't get to their goal, pick up the phone. They don't want to, but they will when they're in crisis.
So Emily, I'll let you have a follow-up question as well, but I guess in your role, kind of in a marketing role, what kind of stood out from Nicola, as well as that piece? Because I completely agree, the kind of the intention and the context. I think we assume all our customers are neutral all the time and ready for information to be thrown at them left, right and centre often. But was there anything else that really stood out to you as something that, from a marketing perspective, we need to think about more?
Yeah, so the kind of piece around immersive technology, obviously my little marketing brain lit up with lots of ideas for exhibition booths, and kind of how you can use perhaps immersive technology to kind of in a call for a product demonstration. So it's good to see that people are more open to engaging with those kind of channels. But hopefully our kind of budgets, which is our always a risk limiting factor, can keep up with that as well. And I was really interested as well in what you were saying about chatbots and AI, because obviously I'm kind of quite skeptical and I start to think of the complexity of approval. So it'd be interesting to hear if anyone in the audience is using them or has any experience of using them, because I haven't. And to be honest, I just think of how you could get anything approved with the kind of thousands of different answers that you can possibly get out. That kind of makes my palms a little bit sweaty, to be honest. But that's quite interesting, and particularly what you were saying about you can kind of have your chatbot kind of on the reverse as a little helper to give feedback, because that would be quite interesting, because I think you might dig out a bit of underlying feedback that people don't necessarily say to you in person. You might kind of get to the crux of their feedback, because I know when I ask people for feedback, they would go, oh yeah, it was great, and then sometimes they might think something different. So that would be quite interesting too, to see if you could get some more insights that way.
Yeah, I just as an add-on on the generative AI side, particularly in terms of regulation and legalities. Obviously, one of the problems we're having with that is if it doesn't have the answer, it makes it up. That's something they call hallucination for some reason. But yeah, I think when you're in an industry where you're very highly regulated, that's not something you want.
No, that makes you quite nervous.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I was in Lisbon last week at the MAPS EMEA meeting. We were talking about ChatGPT and a kind of application in healthcare. And you're right, I think everyone has exactly the same anxiety around it, because someone's going to try it, it's going to go wrong, it's going to say something awful, and it's going to be on the front page of a newspaper. So I think we're all understandably cautious in healthcare. But one of the things that we talked about during the panel session, and I advocate, is do something with it, but that's almost certainly an internal thing. We need to start understanding this technology and how it can be applied in the future. And so an internal pilot is going to help us understand that and understand how it uses the data that we'd be eventually probably sharing externally. But piloting something internally is a really great way to understand that and be on that learning curve rather than permanently playing catch up. So that's one thing. I think there's also a nice piece there, as you said, around using them for feedback, but also potentially using it not to necessarily answer questions, but almost as a kind of, coming back, Nicola, to your point, a butler rather than a stalker, but someone who can direct you to the right piece of pre-approved content. And actually the point around it is the natural language. So rather than you having to type in keywords, you can just ask a really lovely natural question that you would ask to a human, and it'll be much better at saying, okay, well, the resources you want are these ones. So there are a few use cases that I think are less scary than just the like, can I use this drug for this patient chatbot, that are the baby steps that we need to start piloting in order to be, on that curve at least, if not ahead of it. John, I'm going to bring you in here as well. So John, you've obviously got a more medical perspective on this and based in the US. I guess you might have some questions from Nicola about the US side of things, but what kind of jumped out at you from Nicola's presentation?
Yeah, I thought on the graph, the shift to organizational website as a channel that people are going to, and that uptick recently, I thought that was interesting. I don't know, obviously what sector it is, but it's kind of a more general information. But I think in pharma, we always struggle with being able to drive people to our website to get information. And once they get there, it's it's very difficult to find how to contact somebody and get the information you really want, whether you're, whatever audience you may be, because there's the HCP website, there's the patient website, there's there's a search bar, there's all these different things. And I think that's a real challenge. So it's interesting for me to see that as a kind of an uptick. The other thing I thought was, I really liked the idea just about the internal pilot for like a med info type of chatbot. There's a lot of cross-functional colleagues that could leverage the information and data that we have, to kind of formulate messaging. I do feel like it should be used as almost like a first pass to create those kind of canned answers and resources first, and then utilize that kind of natural understanding and be trained on those resources so that it could be natural as they're kind of searching for it. And that I like kind of the focus on text too. I mean, we don't in the US use WhatsApp as heavily as our ex-US partners, but I think a lot of content that we develop on the medical side is not mobile friendly. And so things like SAM response letters, or even a PowerPoint deck, or even an infographic that you have to zoom in on, I think are all very obviously PDF heavy. And so we need to find ways to support the omnichannel strategy with the content that people want to hear. And I think that the biggest challenge with that is developing lots of different content for different channels so that people can digest it in different ways. But I think it's going to be more important for us to kind of analyze, this type of research to understand what type of mediums people actually want, and use that to use our resources in the best way.
Yeah, and Nicola, I mean, I know we focused more on channels in that presentation, but a word on kind of device use and things like that as well.
Yeah, we have actually, I didn't put the stats up, but we have been looking at device usage as well. That was interesting because we did see a little bit of a shift in the pandemic to away from some of the mobile devices and away from apps, because we were at home. So we weren't necessarily, apps is a very interesting one. I think that everyone's inclination is they want to develop an app, but we're still seeing an issue around that in particular, because why would you download an app for something very specific if you weren't going to use it very often? So what we find there is that when we ask customers, show us what apps you've got on their phones, generally it will be banking apps, it will be some shopping apps, but it won't be every other app in between. And that's, I think, why the website piece is interesting, because it is the website that people go to. But to your point, John, that website also needs to be mobile optimized, because people are still using their phone. Well, actually, we're again seeing a bit of an uptick now. People are released from their houses around people doing a little bit more on their mobile devices. So rather than developing an app, let's just make sure that the website is mobile friendly and that people can access it.
Yeah.
I have two things just before I forget them. But for Nicola, I think you're right. The one thing I think about though is there's a lot of web apps now, right? That on your phone you can download it to, your as a homepage on your iPhone or Android, and so they act as apps right on your phone. So people think they're apps, and they're easier to develop, to update, that sort of thing. So I think that's probably a direction people could go if they really wanted to develop an app that was accessible and dynamic. The other thing I think you mentioned earlier, and I think Emily might have alluded to, is we're in a really highly regulated industry, and that in and of itself is a challenge, because I think we're always playing behind, like even medical to commercial is always pushing the envelope with the things that they're doing, and kind of walking that kind of gray line. I think medical, for us, we're always kind of stuck in this box of they just want the information in a Word document. They don't want it in any sort of interactive way, and we're learning now that that's not the case. But FDA and MHRA and that type of thing really crack down on how things are presented and how we reach out to customers. And I think we only can get a certain reactive omni-channel profile and perspective on the audience. So I think that's always a challenge too.
Yeah, John, I was just going to come back to Nicola to that point around kind of mobile optimized website, but it's not just the website itself. To your point, John, it's if it's a lovely optimized website, but everything on it is a PDF that when you open on your phone, you can't read, you're going to get annoyed with it really quickly, right? So it's everything that you're embedding in the website as well.
Yeah.
And how you're kind of linking between the different parts of the website as well, because you want that, I was interested in this, so what am I looking for next?
Exactly.
And coming back to that, does AI help you co-pilot someone through that? So you're taking them on a journey, keeping them engaged once you've finally got them to your website. I think those are some of the most exciting areas for me, and where I think we'll be going. Emily, do you want to come back on John's accusation that you're always ahead in marketing?
Well, firstly, Jan, that was a really great point actually about mobile optimization for kind of PDFs and things, because that, to be honest, isn't something that I've ever really considered before. So I'm now frantically thinking about what materials perhaps need to be mobile optimized. I mean, I think perhaps sometimes marketing does tend to try different approaches, whether it's kind of like an interactive PDF rather than just a Word document, or an infographic rather than just a list of bullet points. But I think there's kind of a role where you can kind of go hand in hand, and perhaps marketing can help medical with some kind of bridge between the all singing, all dancing PDFs. But then I think medical can play a role in sometimes kind of tempering down marketing's enthusiasm for all singing, all dancing things, because I mean, whilst I think it would be really kind of cool and exciting to have a hologram of a KOL on your exhibition booth, I think perhaps like just a normal video recording perhaps would do the job better and would be kind of more easy to approve than something that's kind of really interactive and you have lots of pathways and thousands of different options. So yeah, I think there's a role where we kind of work together.
Very diplomatic, well done. Nicola, any further comment on any of those topics before I start going to some audience questions?
No.
Oh, good. So a kind of pharma specific question for all of us, I guess. Are we expecting any change in the channels that we use with HCP? So I guess a change in which of those channels are being used the most, or any new ones that we might be exploring. Emily, I know you've been looking at kind of brand planning and things like that. Are you kind of changing the channel mix from what you've done previously? Are there any new ones that you're exploring at the moment?
Not so much. I mean, because I'm fortunate enough to have been in pharma long enough that when I first started in pharma, we were communicating with our customers only by letter. So that I'm pleased that we're no longer doing paper mailings. But I think perhaps pharma's got kind of a little bit of work to do to kind of catch up with some other industries, especially around kind of digital comms and omnichannel. I think we've got to kind of get that right first before we start looking at kind of other channels. But then by the time when we've got that right, there'll be more channels and different things. But I mean, as I'm sure everyone knows, that it is really tricky around the kind of regulatory and compliance environment. That we do sometimes need a little bit of time to kind of figure that out before we can go ahead and try something new. So yeah, that's why I think we are.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm always a big fan of don't just add more channels for the sake of it. Make sure the channels you've got are working well before you start investing elsewhere. But John, from your side, what would you be doing? What would you be recommending people are prioritizing?
Yeah, I think for us, it's not about having new channels for the HCPs. It's just about understanding, like, you know, their tendencies and where they come to and what they're expecting from the content and portals and things that we are developing. You know, I think there is something to be said about HCP self-service portals, but I think they need to be not a heavy investment until you have kind of that proof of investment, right? Because I think people go, you know, wide and deep with it, and they want live chat and they want to connect with an MSL and they want all these other things. And I think there's easy ways to do that, you know, to kind of create kind of a ground roots type of a pilot, like you were talking about, versus, you know, going full bore into it. And then just kind of, you know, talking back to that point we were making earlier about content, is just like you can have a really fancy platform, but if like you don't have the topics that they're looking for and it's not easy for them to digest, then it's really the platform doesn't really make much of a difference, you know. And I think the last thing I'll touch on is just the experience with the content, or the analytics around the content. I think we were touching about it earlier in the IVR, and you call and you're like, you know, you're next on the call. The thing I always think about is like Domino's, Amazon. I just like, you know, why Uber won over taxi is because people like knowing where things are in the process. And I don't think there's been a really good medical information system yet that really kind of says, like, we've received your request, and then like we're researching your request and we're formulating your request. I think even if those things don't really tie to anything tactical, people like seeing the progression and people like knowing that we're doing something about it. And I think that's one of the biggest tenets that I've kind of pushed towards is the customer like has expectations of us. We may not always be able to meet those, but I think we should always strive to think about what the customer wants. I think that ties back to Welt and Dr. Nicola's original topic of this engagement.
Yeah, absolutely. And I really like that point, a med info request, the least we can do is let them know we're progressing it, right? And it comes back to that, can we make it a more personal experience and say, what does this customer want? Are they in crisis? Do they want the super fast response? And we just have to send them whatever we've got pre-approved that's really quick. Or are we going to come back with something more personalized? Now, whether we're using something like ChatGPT to help generate a more personalized response, but then it needs validating, blah, blah, blah. Okay, will they want that if we can give them that update and say, we're giving you something personal, so it's going to take a bit longer, but here's the estimated date that we'll get it to you. Some really interesting thoughts around that. And that comes back to that point around identifying whether that customer's in kind of visionary, utilitarian or crisis mode at that point, and therefore what they're likely to want. So Nicola, I'll come back to you on that of kind of, you were nodding furiously to a lot of what John said. So thoughts and reflections.
Yeah, I mean, I think that emotional piece is very important to understand. And to your point, Jess, you can have every channel in the universe. I mean, but you do need to understand that every channel you add, the more complexity you get, and particularly when you've got a customer in crisis coming in, possibly on multiple channels, because that's what they do. That can create a really horrendous experience. So it is around understand what channels your customers want, understand what channels you can cope with, and then make sure you also signpost customers to the right channel as well. That's a big thing, I think, that that's again a trick that we can start to do around trying to optimize those journey paths so that customers actually do get where they need to go over the right channel. And that's a better experience.
And I have to say, I caught myself doing exactly that, being a customer in crisis and multiple channels since we saw your presentation the first time round. And I caught myself on the phone waiting in a queue, also trying to web chat and send an email and being on Twitter seeing if there was a service update, because I was so angry. It was just like, whatever gets me there fastest. So yes, that really, I realized what I was doing and was like, take a deep breath.
And they're experiencing very high call volumes.
Yeah, exactly that. Perfect. Okay, we've got a couple of minutes left. If there's any more questions from the audience, please do send them through. We'll try and get back to you if we don't get them to them today. But Emily, any kind of, I know you had a long list of questions for Nicola, any others that we didn't get to yet?
I think that's everything, but I think just to build on what John was saying, I think really it's probably about quality rather than quantity. If you can get just a few really good, strong channels, that's probably going to create a better customer experience than having hundreds of channels which cross over and can potentially leave a negative experience for the customer.
Yeah, absolutely. John, any other kind of final thoughts from you?
Yeah, I guess I had a quick question for Dr. Nicola about like best practices for chatbots, because I think, we land on a page, the virtual assistant comes up, and sometimes they say they're a virtual assistant, sometimes they say, they're nothing. But do you feel like it's important for us to set the stage that this is a virtual assistant first, and then they have the option to click to a live agent? And then does the customer understand the value that they're getting out of an options that they can utilize within that virtual aspect of the chatbot versus, what they might get from an answer, with an agent?
I do think that, again, from transparency and honesty perspective, I think people shouldn't pretend a bot is human. And it gets even more complicated if you then do transfer it to a human. So, the bot should be the bot, make it clear it's a bot. Obviously, there are some limitations of bots, and actually sometimes people are forgiving of that. And they behave slightly differently with bots as well. Sometimes they are more honest, maybe they are more direct, sometimes they can be a bit rude as well, but you know, when they transfer over to a human, the behavior is slightly different. So you know, if you are going to sort of blend it, I think it's very important to sort of say the bot's the bot, the human's the human. You've got slightly different expectations on that interaction depending on where you are. So to be honest, most people just want to get to a goal, and I think if you can use a bot effectively to do that, brilliant. But don't pretend it's a human. But you know, it's all about outcomes largely from a customer perspective, rather than necessarily the as I said, they don't obsess about channels. We do, they don't.
I think we're starting to, like, the chatbot world is starting to become the IVR world, where it's like press 1 for this, 2 for this, and it's like, I wish there was just an agent button on the chat that I could talk to someone. It's like, I know ahead of time that none of these like prompts are going to get me to where I need, and I'm very, like, you know, very specific use case. So I think we would benefit from giving them that option. And I would be interested to see how many people kind of give the bot a chance and how many people go straight to agent. Yeah.
Perfect. So Nicola, I know you need to head off very promptly, so we'll wrap up on time. Thank you everyone for your questions, for your attention. Nicola, it's been fabulous to have you back again, and Emily and John, really great reflections. I've really enjoyed the conversation, and it's definitely got us thinking. I'd love to see some of that research with some specific HCP questions in there. Maybe that's a job we need to take away. But yeah, thank you everyone. James, nice to have you back. Any final thoughts?
Thanks everyone, it was brilliant. Well done.